Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started now with our keynote panel for this afternoon. So I'm Brian Wilder. I'm faculty at Carnegie Mellon University in the machine learning department, and I'll be moderating. So we're really happy to have our three distinguished panelists here today. I'll do a sort of a brief round of introductions and then kick things off. So I guess starting closest to me, we have Rayid Ghani. Rayid is a distinguished career professor in the machine learning department at the Heinz College of Information Systems and Public Policy and the machine learning department at Carnegie Mellon University. Rayid collaborates widely with governments and nonprofits on policy challenges in a range of areas, including very relevant to us today, health and human services. He's also passionate about data science education and founded the Data Science for Social Good Fellowship Program. And before moving back into academia, he served as chief scientist for the Obama 2012 election campaign. Next down here is Randall Taylor. Randall is a lifelong resident of Pittsburgh's East End and has since worked for the Urban League of Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh Coalition Against Substance Abuse, and the Allegheny County Treasurer's Office. He was then elected to the Pittsburgh Board of Education, where he served for 12 years. In response to a mass displacement of hundreds of residents at the Penn Plaza apartments here in Pittsburgh, Randall helped to form the Penn Plaza Support and Action Coalition, which has since become a leader in Pittsburgh's housing justice movement, and he continues to advocate for affordable housing solutions here in Pittsburgh. And then finally, last but not least, Pim Welle is the chief data scientist at the Allegheny County Department of Human Services, and he holds a PhD from engineering and public policy here at CMU, and has focused in his career on developing statistical and machine learning systems for government institutions to try to evaluate system effectiveness and help direct resources towards individuals with the greatest need. Pim also volunteered before the panel here to be in the hot seat. So I'll also mention that Pim's team recently led the redesign of the system that the Allegheny County Department of Human Services uses to prioritize applicants for housing assistance, right? So they rebuilt all of the predictive models that are used to rank applicants for these systems, and this is recently launched and what's running day to day right now. So thanks, Pim, for volunteering, for us to scrutinize, what your team has been up to. So that also sets up the focus of our panel today, which is to use housing assistance and housing more generally as the domain to talk about the role of data and algorithms in public life and public policy. So we're going to focus on questions about, what makes those kind of allocated systems that determines who gets assistance, what makes those systems just, and what role can or should algorithms and data play in making those systems more effective. So I'm going to start things off with a sort of, very open-ended question, which is just, for our panelists, what in your experience does a fair and just housing assistance system look like, right? Like, what are the goals that we should be trying to pursue here? So I mean, we'll hear from all of you, but in whatever order you want to start.
I guess I got a mic. I will take a swing at this one. I might be just a little bit longer winded on this one, and Brian, cut me off if this goes too long. I'll answer the question, but I first want to talk about a common misconception in the housing space that we run into time and time again. And the misconception is that there are homeless people and that there are not homeless people, and those groups are really different. This is a really American conception that you actually think of homelessness as intrinsic to the individual and not something that they're going through. And it's often better to, when you're thinking about homelessness, to think about it like unemployment. There are lots of people who have very short spells of unemployment, and there are certain folks who have much longer spells of unemployment. And you really need to kind of stare at that fact, because that's also true in the housing and homelessness system if you want to have a good response to this problem. To give you some numbers really quickly, in Allegheny County, about 50% of our folks that are in our shelters will be resolved in about 3 months, and about 90% of people will be resolved in about 12 months. Now, those are terrible periods for those individuals. Those are periods where you really need to support an individual. But those rates of resolution are often much higher than what people think, and they end up driving bad policy decisions. So, for example, the Trump administration just had an executive order which suggested using psychiatric commitments to fix the problem of this homelessness. And it's really driven by this idea that there are persistently homeless individuals who are not able to resolve. So we need to do these very drastic things in order to get them off the street. It turns out for homelessness, we have very good tools. Our rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, Section 8, these deep housing subsidies where you pay for housing for someone for a long period of time actually does a really good job at making people not homeless anymore. I joke sometimes, but if you give somebody a house, they're not homeless anymore. Like, we know how to solve this in many, many ways. But the thing that most people miss is that we've got sort of different styles of homelessness. So we've got these very short spells, which we need to handle very differently than these large spells. So that's kind of one misconception I just want to say out front, because it's something that people routinely get wrong when they start thinking about this problem. But if I had to kind of answer the fair and just system response, I would say that what we need is affordable housing for people, and we need rapid responses when there's shocks to their lives that make it so that they don't have access to safe and affordable housing. And so this involves working at a lot of different levels. At one level, we need to make sure that the median rents of the city don't go up, because what's been happening over the last 5 years is we have more and more people living with housing insecurity. They're rent burdened, right? So that's one thing that we need to do. For everyone in the city, we need to keep the median rents down. For people who are in short spikes of homelessness, we need to have availability in our emergency shelters so that they have places to stay when they're in active crisis. And for people who are long-term chronically homeless, we need to have long-term housing support. So things like rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, Section 8, so that if you, for example, have a criminal record, you're having a harder time getting a job, we can really support you for a few years as you're getting back on your feet. So I think it's a whole system response. And I may talk about this a little bit later, but we're often just thinking about the tail end of it, and we're sort of getting wagged by the tail in some respects. So that would be my stab at that question.
That's a big question there. So I'll ask it. I'll answer it more. What does a fair housing system look like? And you know, I have to tell people. As he mentioned, I served on the Pittsburgh School Board for 12 years. I thought education was the thing that would change communities around and change, you know, lives around. I know what the University of Pittsburgh did for my family, so I was completely sold that education was, you know, really the thing that would change, you know, everything for everyone. And I thought that way till I was part of a mass displacement of over 300 people. I think it was closer to 500. There were like close to 300 who had leases. Most of those folks weren't living alone. And we lost our home for the Whole Foods that many people here shop at in East Liberty. And so that, you know, set me into the journey of not only housing, but housing justice. And the reason why I'm so passionate about it now is because it is really one of the rare issues that we could solve. And so when I think about what fair housing is, that's a place where someone feels safe in their housing is clean, their housing is affordable. Nobody should be paying 50 and 60% of their monthly income for rent. It should be stable. They shouldn't be concerned that a landlord is going to raise the rents or just say, I'm selling the building, and things like that. So how can we get to that fair system? All of us have to change our way of thinking about housing. And housing, one, should be a human right. Everybody deserves, as a human being, to have a roof over their head, whether they can afford to pay for it or not. We, as a civilized society, should provide that as the same as we would provide food to someone who couldn't, you know, afford food. And so we all have to think, number one is that, and then we have to understand that housing should not be a commodity. Pizzas should be a commodity that you can buy and sell for profit. But housing, which you need for human existence, you need a roof over your head or you will die in the winter, is nothing that should be a commodity. But unfortunately, in the last 20 years particularly, there are a lot of rich folks who found out there's a lot of money in housing. There's a lot of people, as public housing was replaced in this country going on now 30 years ago, where public housing was privatized. Those guys were on it from the 1930s, that they knew that public housing would be a threat. But we have to understand that there's no place for profit in that. And when I say how we all have to change, How many people here would like to own a home one day? Nothing's wrong with that. But don't you hope that home goes up in appreciation, in value, knowing that you didn't do anything, you know, for that price to go up, but you hope that it goes up, and that you hope that you can sell it to someone else in this room and make that extra $100,000, which means you become part of the problem. Now you want to make money off of housing. And so a fair, just system is, as I described earlier, that it's accessible to everybody, it's clean and it's safe, and it's affordable. But we have to, again, change our mindset about housing is a commodity to make money off of. Housing should be a place to live your life, to live with your family, to enjoy holidays, to mourn tragedies or deaths in your family. That's what a home is. That's the kind of home I grew up in. And it was just a home that we loved, and we just enjoyed being a family there together. And once we begin to understand there's no room for profit making in housing, we'll begin to change policies, and we'll begin to be able to afford the type of housing that I described earlier.
Okay, that's it's a little bit depressing conversation, because I don't think we're anywhere close to these things. Unfortunately, you know, any conversation we're going to have about health and human services, or it's going to be depressing. And so I guess I agree with everything both of you said. And the only couple of things I would add is, I think a fair and just housing system doesn't or shouldn't rely on the individuals to do, like, giving access is not enough. And so the way I think about a fair and just housing system is more about a current state, where it's not that housing is affordable, it's that everybody is stably housed. Affordability doesn't lead to people stably housed, because they also have other needs. And so at some point in my life, I used to think about problems as, you know, education and housing and health and benefit programs and I've transportation and jobs. And I very quickly realized that, you know, I was naive. That's people are not thinking about it that way, right? All these things are connected. The same people who have housing needs also have education needs. If you're not housed, you can't be educated. If you're moving around, you can't go to school. And it's not like people are idiots who want to live in that neighborhood, even though they can't afford the rent. It's that the kid is going to school in that area. And if they end up going over there where they have relatives and cheaper housing, they're going to have to take their kid out of school and figure out where to educate them. Their job is not in the place. There's no nearby hospital. There's no nearby grocery store, which makes all of this infinitely more complicated. It's not just about finding housing for people, because as Pim said, well, or you said, it's easy to solve the problem. Just give them housing. But that's not a solution, unfortunately. You can build houses in Kansas and say, everybody move to Kansas. People have tried that, you know, doesn't really work. So I guess what I want to sort of come back to is, if we can sort of agree on what is the end state that we want, which is everybody is stably housed while meeting all their other needs, right? Not at the expense of food and education. How do we design a system that helps us get there? And then I think hopefully where we'll get to is, how do we navigate trade-offs? Because it's going to be, as unfortunately today, trade-offs, right? Where each organization is going to have some money to spend on these types of issues. How do they prioritize, and how do they balance? How much do they rely on an individual to ask for help versus proactively help people who they think correctly or incorrectly need help? So hopefully I think we can kind of think about more actionable operational things while agreeing on the overall principles of, here's the end state we want to get to.
So following up on that then, so you point out that, you know, there's this sort of gap between just housing being available and people being housed, and then the need to prioritize, right, to figure out, you know, given limited resources, how do we actually move towards that world? And so next I want to ask then, so relative to the way that decisions about how to prioritize those resources are being made now in Pittsburgh, right? Like, how do you see those decisions being made? What do you think is working well? Where do we need to be, where can and should we do better?
I think when we look at and I'll get to who I feel see some of the forces in Pittsburgh who really are profiting very handsomely from this situation. So again, if you heard me mention earlier about public housing, that is where the crisis in housing started, in my opinion, with the destruction of public housing. In the city of Pittsburgh, particularly because the city of Pittsburgh destroyed close to 70% of its public housing. And if you think it was like a strategy to, do better or rehabilitate properties, all you have to do is Google St. Clair Village and take a look at that picture, and you'll see what was once a 900 unit public housing community. Now you see a vacant lot. So there was simply no idea other than to destroy, just to I think, to change the demographic profile of the city of Pittsburgh. So public housing, again, was a successful. And next week we have a nice program that I'll give you some flyers where Edward Getz at the University of Minnesota, who speaks very much about the history of public housing. They say it was a system that worked very well for decades that was undermined at every level, from defunding to moving working people, out of the system. So I mentioned that because the replacement of public housing, the privatization of public housing is the system that we have right now. And it is a system that is greatly beneficial to two players in this city that are, no, really three, Trek Development, Action Housing, and McCormick Barron out of St. Louis. And so every time they tear down something, they build a whole lot less. And they receive tax credits. If people familiar with low-income tax credits, that's what they use to fund their programs. They pull very little money out of their programs. Remember, in most instances, they're building far less units than what they had. The government basically gives them most of the money to build the project. They pull very little out of their pocket. They also receive your public land as well. They only have to keep it affordable for a set period of time, which I think is 30 years now. They're pushing our current city council to shorten those terms to 15 years. And after those 15 years, they take your tax dollars, your public land, and it all belongs to them and their family. And that I mentioned in the meantime, they make people rent, from them. And then when they rent, they use, for instance, in East Liberty, there's a melon orchard. And those apartments, they're able to charge market rate for East Liberty, $1,700. And so most of the people are on a sliding scale for their income. So there could be some in there paying $1,000, and the other $700 are paid by you, the taxpayer. Now, did I just describe to you a very good deal? And it is a very good deal. And that is housing policy, not in this city, but in this country. Those are the people who make the decisions on what gets built, where it gets built. They also make the decisions on who gets to live there. And they also stuff the pockets of our local elected officials during their campaign contributions, and they stuff their pockets and are able to set housing policy in this city, which is why you see the lack of affordable housing, the lack of affordable housing units, and again, so many units that are not on the market that used to be public housing that are part of the crisis that we have right now. And as again, I'll mention, those are things that could be changed by policy. There's no reason to empower a Trek Development when you can empower local community groups. They can do the same thing that they do, is build the housing and operate it and not seek the profit. There's no reason the Trek Development is charging $1,700 for that apartment in East Liberty. They do it because they can. And so, like I say again, as I'll keep mentioning, there are solutions, there are changes, there are public policy changes that we can make that could begin to solve this issue. I really do believe that.
All right, I like this random order that we've got going. This is great. So I work at the Department of Human Services. There's a lot of different players in the homelessness space, which is good. There's a lot of people trying to solve this very complicated problem, but I'm going to speak narrowly to the kind of corner of this that I know best, which is the emergency homelessness system. So a lot of people, when they think about homelessness response, they think about the emergency shelters. And that's absolutely true, both here in Pittsburgh and nationally. That is a big part of how we handle this sort of emergency short-term homelessness. But there's also other programs. So I mentioned rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing before. These are programs which are on the order of maybe 2 to 4 years. And we support people in scattered site housing. We sort of deeply subsidize their unit. That's a way of building back someone. You take somebody who is currently unsheltered, you work with them, you have supportive services in those programs, and upon graduation, the hope is that they're able to support themselves in the long term. Now, it turns out nationally, that's about half of our beds are these units compared to the emergency shelter beds, which are about half the beds. And I think a lot of people don't really fixate on, that's a big part of it as a country, our homelessness response. Even though it's a large part of our homelessness response, we're able to move in, I think, 400 families a year into rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing out of the roughly 4,000 people who experience homelessness. So we've got a prioritization problem. We've got to select which individuals are going to get into that. And, you know, what I see locally at DHS is I see a lot of people working very hard to get people who are actively homeless, move them into a unit, you know, not in Kansas, but somewhere that they want to live, support them in that transition. But it's not nearly enough for the scale of the problem. It's a really desired program. We don't have trouble sort of selling it. People want it. They want to move in. But unfortunately, we don't. These are HUD-funded resources. We don't have infinite resources on this front. I'll say that there's lots of other parts of the homelessness system as you go out. And one part that I would just say I would love to see sort of like increased collaboration. And this is something that's starting to happen with Sarah Namorato's 500 and 500 campaign, other programs, is the use of the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program to support people who have been recently unsheltered. It turns out in the data that even though there are fewer supports with Section 8 housing choice vouchers relative to the rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing plans, people do very well in Section 8. The problem is it's just I kind of talked in my first response that we have a disjointed system sort of pulling in different ways. And we really need to, I think, focus these Section 8 housing choice vouchers, first of all, on getting people in relatively quickly, because when people are in acute housing crisis, you don't want that wait time to be really long, but also targeting those at individuals who are experiencing homelessness or having experienced homelessness in the past is, I think, something that we could do as a community to increase the efficiency of our homelessness response.
Yeah, so I liked Randall, you're talking about the real fix. That fix will solve all the problems. And I think, Pim, you're sort of going into it. Here's a specific problem. I'll give another specific one, which is not the real fix, but it's a short-term fix that we've been working on with the county, which is a very, very narrow set of people, which is an eviction prevention program, right? It only applies to a small number of people, but affects them really deeply. And so for people kind of in my position, the choice is that we can, we're not uniquely suited to change the macro policy. I don't have enough money to bribe the politicians, but I have enough resources to change outcomes for, a handful of people every week. And so that's initially what the focus is, to show that can be done and then try to scale it in other ways. So for example, this work that we've been doing the last few years has been there's a national program, which is eviction. There's money available for eviction prevention, and different cities and counties use it in different ways. So the way Allegheny County has been using it is there is a physical place you can go to or a phone number you can call and say, hey, I'm being evicted. Can you help me pay my back rent? And there's a bunch of eligibility criteria you have to, and limits and things like that. But that hotline is flooded with people. People keep calling it, people keep showing up, and it's first come, first serve, which is state of the art in public policy today. We do it because we're lazy. We don't want to spend any extra time. We don't want to spend any extra effort in finding the right people. So we just wait until people show up and we help whoever shows up first. So if you call early and you call often, you get help. If you call late or you don't call, you don't get help. Now, to their credit, the county realized, that's terrible. We have to figure out how could we do better job. And I think what the question they came to us with was, we have limited resources, or we can't help everyone. We're doing first come, first serve. And we know by doing that, we're leaving people behind who are not coming to us. So could we turn this eviction prevention money into not just eviction prevention, but also homelessness prevention? Which is it's a policy choice, right? The money is there for preventing eviction. So they could just give people money and prevent eviction and say, done. But they're saying, no, we want to redirect this money so that we could prevent eviction. We could prevent eviction and prevent nothing else. Or we could prevent eviction and improve education outcomes or homelessness outcomes or health outcomes. And they sort of like, we want to try to see how do we redirect this money so that it prevents eviction and prevents homelessness. And so what we've been working with them on is a system that kind of just highlights people to them who are facing eviction. So everybody is in need of money, but who would otherwise, if you don't help them, they're going to become homeless. And that's a value choice that the county is making. Like people who are going to be homeless are worth more to us than people who are not going to be homeless. We can argue about that choice. We can have a discussion, and we've had these town hall discussions, community discussions about, is that the right choice to make? But given that choice, there are lots of solutions, right? So as Pim was saying, there's a large number of people in the county who are working hard to help anybody who shows up. They don't know everybody's personal situation. They don't have access to everything. They don't have the time. They're overworked. And so what the tiny help, these types of systems are helping them with is, hey, here are 20 people to focus on. So for the last year or so, what we've been doing is giving a set of people these lists so that they can go and do outreach. And then based on that outreach, they're identifying people who are otherwise wouldn't have called, wouldn't have gotten the help, and connecting them with rental assistance resources that otherwise would have gone to somebody who would have been evicted, but maybe not homeless, right? So that's, again, kind of a small example of where we don't have, we're hoping in the next few months, we're going to actually have results. We have some early results, but we're not hoping results like how much homelessness did it prevent, at what cost, and is this program the right program to use this money for, and could we then use it in other types of situations? But early results are, we're finding people who otherwise would have been lost, would have become homeless, and by the tiny cost of just pointing it out to somebody and somebody making a call, we're hopefully able to prevent somebody from becoming homeless, which I think is worth doing until we figure out the real fix.
Yeah, because I don't want to sound like, I hope I'm not sounding pessimistic, because I thought I started off saying that there are actual solutions to this. That should make us, very excited. Am I pessimistic about the state of our country right now? Yeah. But as far as these issues, and the reason I want to mention that is that eviction prevention money, I forget how much is in that pot of money, but you can, there is a pot of money which, if you're facing eviction, you may be able to get some dollars. We've instituted, and the city government has been very financially supportive of Lawyer for a Day. Right now, in some of our highest districts with rates of eviction or eviction filings, you will have an attorney with you. And we have seen evictions cut 80% in those districts. We have a $10 million affordable housing fund that was passed, I believe, out of voters a few years ago. The 500 for one is an amazing. Again, I haven't looked at it to see how successful it is, but I surely know that our county executive and her staff are serious about that. And if you look around our streets, we do not have the issues that I saw in Atlanta or I saw in Las Vegas, where there are actually literally hundreds of people laying in the streets. You don't see that in Pittsburgh. So I cannot be pessimistic when I look at a housing justice movement in this city of Pittsburgh that is really the envy of other cities. We are working hard around non-market solutions to the housing crisis. We just started an organization, Steel City Cooperative Housing Association, a year ago. One of our local foundations has just been very generous in funding us to explore the idea of bringing tenant-owned housing cooperatives here to Pittsburgh, which, if people don't know, we have the oldest African-American-owned tenant-owned housing cooperative in this city, 118 unit, owned by all African-Americans, started in 1952. So we know housing cooperatives work, and we're very soon going to push this city to get back into the public housing business. So I'm not pessimistic at all about the future.
So I want to follow up on something I think in both Randall and Rayid's last comments here, which is the sort of like interaction between the macro and the micro levels here, right? Because I think Randall, like some of what you said is that like the macro climate sort of like is not set up to produce affordable housing, right? And this is like the systematic problem that's generating everything downstream. And then the question then I think for a lot of people in the audience here, right, like academics, with sort of like technical skill sets, is that it's easiest for us to contribute to the micro level, right, to figure out like for some like specific assistance program, like how do we tune that to work like a little bit more efficiently. And I think that's a difficult thing, right? Like, how do you figure out, whether the problem that you're working on is even meaningful in the macro scale, right? Is this actually worth it? Is it improving things? Randall, I think some of what you point out is that maybe some of these specific programs like have more leverage than others, right? Like given the macro climate, maybe providing, lawyer for a day is like a really impactful, like has an outsized impact, for example. But I'm curious to hear more about that and like how you, like sort of your advice for people in this room, from any of our panelists, basically, about like how to bridge those skills, basically, like think a little bit bigger, basically, and then let that inform, maybe like the sort of the specific things that we take on.
Brian, help us out with the question a little bit. Maybe we need a little bit more help.
I'm happy to start, at least just to kind of, I mean, I think, so this is a question that I've struggled with for many, many, many years, right? Do you solving the micro doesn't solve the macro. Solving the macro doesn't do anything because you can't solve it without starting from the micro. So my personal approach has been start with the micro, not because that's where the long-term fix lies, but that's where you will get personal credibility and education and experience. Like Randall has experience because he's lived this. Most of us and most of people who work on this from the technical side in academia don't have that experience and don't have the credibility, and haven't invested the time in understanding the situation on the ground, talking to people who have been affected, being around. So I think, to me, micro is not the end point, but micro is the beginning, because the macro gets very easily sort of like, I can't fix it. Whereas the micro gets you like, okay, if you can start working in a city, in a neighborhood, in a block, start understanding that problem, start looking at what's there, even just like, what's the current situation, not worry about anything complicated. Like, people are saying, I can't find housing. Well, how many people is that? How many houses are there? I think like LA for me, one of the first housing things I looked at was in Los Angeles, which is by far the worst mismatch of people who need housing and rental units available. It's just, there's no way you're going to fix that problem with just allocating things. LA also has lots of other ridiculous problems on housing policy because they just chose to close their eyes. Just in case somebody's curious, one of the weirdest things that I found about LA, because it was just baffled me, was you can basically, evict people. You can evict people from rent controlled places unless you're turning it into a condo building. So what people do is they would evict people, say, I'm turning into a condo building. Once everybody's evicted, you can turn it back into a rental. And by law, you're supposed to, by city or county law, you're supposed to notify those people, and they have the first right of refusal. Except nobody knows where those people are because there is no rental registry. And so that's a data problem, right? That's a fixable data problem where those people, and so I think a lot of these types of micro problems help you understand the current situation. They connect you with the organizations, the people, they give you credibility. And I think then you start moving into higher and higher level. You start working with multiple cities and counties, and you start evaluating impact of certain programs and saying, well, why are we doing this program when there's no evidence that it works? Yes, it works on everyone, but does it work on these people that we're focusing on? Does it improve? So that's at least my advice to a lot of you who are kind of starting out is keep the macro as the goal, but start doing kind of more day-to-day things at the micro level, because I think it'll be more successful.
I think that's about all that you can do, because the issue that we're talking about here in Pittsburgh is not a Pittsburgh issue. It's not a Allegheny County issue. It's not a Pennsylvania issue. It is a worldwide issue. The financialization of housing is happening all over this world. And Pittsburgh is even close to some of the horrible situations you're having in places like London, where you're actually having, it could be drug cartels, it could be people just parking money, and they'll buy whole apartment buildings and just sit on them, and they'll be empty, but it's just cheaper for them just to sit on it because that is real estate in London, which is worth some money as opposed to going through the trouble. So that's going to be real difficult to deal with. And even we bring it down to the United States of America, it's going to be a long time before we are able to actually get policies changed like Franklin Roosevelt, the creation of public housing, and you know, the GI Bill that helped returning veterans, you know, get into a home. It's going to be a long time before we're able to repeal the Faircloth Amendment, which banned the construction of new public housing in this country. So that's why we have to work very much locally, because it's a place where we can make a difference, where there are actually dollars here that we can make them reallocate those dollars in certain ways. The city of New Orleans a few months ago passed a referendum that 10% of their city budget has to go to affordable housing. That referendum was opposed by the mayor, the city council, chamber of commerce, just about all the powers that be, but the people supported it, and it passed 70%. So I firmly believe that we can begin to push here at the local level because the people support some of the changes that we make. In the city of Pittsburgh, the waiting list for Section 8 vouchers is in the thousands. The waiting list for public housing is in the thousands. So that means there's a waiting market for those kind of non-market solutions. So we just have to begin to activate those people and bring them into our movement, which we're trying to do. And I believe firmly that we can begin to solve a lot of these and make a serious dent in this housing crisis, which some people don't call it a crisis. They think the system is working just the way it was designed. And if you set up the system as it is, this is the result that you're going to get. And so I firmly believe, and I'm hoping, because Pittsburgh is a referendum town as well, and I'm really hoping that we can begin to talk in that terms, that we don't have to put money in politicians' hands. We just go right around them and go to the people.
I'm going to add maybe 2 words to that. Yeah, no, I want to start by just saying I've worked on this problem for a few years now, and I share Randall's optimism that this is something we can actually fix and we can do something about. And it's also something where you can be experimental and push the boundaries at the local level, come up with real solutions and export those. I believe all of those are possible. To the part of Brian's question about you know, maybe advice for the room for researchers coming in or earlier stage career data science folks. I had the same instincts as Rayid. I just didn't want to say it first, which is, you know, Rayid's a little braver than I am, which is just, yeah, start at the micro level, understand your corner really, really well. There are people that have been working on this for 30 years. In absence of a data science solution, they're going to go ask that person that's been around for 30 years. That person's going to make a pretty good decision. What you don't want to do is try to like get beyond your skis and you know, like what you should do is pick one corner of this where you think you can be helpful, understand it to the T, and just share true things without the pressure of having to make all those decisions. Because again, there's people that have lived it. There's people that have done this forever. And in absence of you, they're going to trust those people, and those people will make pretty good decisions. But there are like really simple things that you can do. So an example, we just heard that the Section 8 wait lists are a couple of years long. Section 8 is a housing program meant for low-income individuals. It's got a lot of purposes, but one of the purposes could be preventing people from becoming homeless or helping people who are on the cusp. That can be part of what it does. It's not the entire program, but the wait list is 2 years long. And if you look at the data and you do a careful job of analyzing resolution rates using survival curves or whatever, it's not going to take you long to say, hey, how this is working, this first in, first out queue long waitlist thing is not going to prevent any homelessness. And that's not a Pittsburgh thing. That's a thing that's happening everywhere. And what you can do, the value you can provide is being very careful with the data, staying in your lane and saying true things. So I also have the instinct that starting at the micro level until you've been around a little bit longer is the right way to go.
So I think this is a good segue. Another topic that I wanted to ask you all about is the role of community members in shaping how housing services are designed, how they're distributed, holding systems accountable to the needs of the community. Because especially in the context of making those systems more algorithmic in some sense, having there sort of be more like data-driven decisions about how we decide who gets what, then sometimes we also worry that the systems are more opaque, right? Or that they're more difficult to make accountable to people in the community. And so I'm curious about your thoughts about that intersection, right? About how we build sort of like truly like accountable systems.
How residents get a chance to have a voice in those. I mean, I would again. I'm gonna be pessimistic again. They don't. They don't. They don't. I mean, that's a fairly simple answer there. I mean, a lot of times there'll be community meetings, but those are just community meetings that they feel that they need to have to get some real input. As I said, the people are speaking by the years-long waiting list on the Section 8. They're speaking. They're saying this is what we want. We want more support here, more dollars here, even though, again, Section 8 is part of the privatization of public housing as well, where public dollars go into hands of whatever. So now I just think it's just important for maybe for activists, for universities to try to hear the voices of people out there and try to empower them in some kind of way, document some of the things that they say they would like to see and need. But other than that, again, we go back to elected officials. I mean, if people seen these last elections, I mean, our mayor was elected yesterday with 85% of the vote with really token opposition. I mean, is that real democracy? Does he really have to look over his shoulder? We had city council people who were running unopposed. One just openly sided just a week ago, openly sided with developers against the people in the community, and they feel no fear that they have to do that. So unfortunately, that is some pessimistic news. That unfortunately in this city, we have elected officials who really don't feel they have to listen to the people, and in most instances, in my experience, they do not.
I'm trying to decide if I have a different story here. Brian, can you say your question again?
Yeah. So I guess what I'm curious to hear about is, when we talk about, building like allocative systems, right? Like systems that decide like, fine, we have this pot of money to help people with housing in different ways, right? And then we decide, how to split that up, how to prioritize people for different kinds of assistance. We want those systems, I think all of us, to be accountable to the community in some way, right? But like, what does the mechanism for that accountability look like, right? And particularly, when we're talking about making those systems more technical in some way, right? Like having more, more machine learning, more algorithms sort of behind the scenes informing those decisions.
Yeah. Okay, that's clear. I think I'll frame this as an advice question to maybe like sidestepping the like what happens and what today and what best practices. What I would say is that, I've been building machine learning systems in this sort of space, right? I think 8 years now. And if you take that responsibility, you should be terrified at all times. I actually cut my teeth making election forecasts. It's a great place to cut your teeth because if you're wrong one day, everybody knows. If you do stupid, fancy things that don't actually matter, like there's a day the election happens and you lose all your contracts. It's great. So you should bring a healthy sense of fear to any machine learning system that you're building because you could be wrong. And if you're taking it upon yourself to work in this space, if you're wrong, these consequences are really, really large. And I think if you approach it with that mindset, you're going to care a lot about a lot of different things. So for example, sometimes people argue about cluster robust standard errors or something like that. That never matters. Like the stuff that matters is whether you're ingesting your data correctly, you're making decisions along these lines. So what I would say in terms of community accountability is that you should be opening your doors as much as possible all the time, because the concerns that the people who are going to using your system or interfacing with it are going to be practical and real and likely things that you've missed. So for example, if you're doing a prediction algorithm and you're ingesting data, somebody's going to raise their hand and they're going to say, what if the person just moved here 2 months ago? Right, you better have an answer for that. If you don't, like, how are we going to appropriately assess this person if we don't have administrative data on them going back in time. You're going to get a bunch of, like, I think there's this fear that you're going to speak technically and no one's going to understand. No, all those people in the room know much more than you do, and they're going to raise their hand. They're going to say really helpful things. And if you care really deeply about doing a good job and not just like, I'm going to do a generative adversarial neuron. I'm going to do the fanciest thing I can think of. If you care about that, you're in the wrong business. Like, go make more money somewhere else. But if you care about getting the answer right, you should be trying to open the doors as much as you can all the time, because there are lots of practical ways that these systems fail and produce garbage. And unless you try to like invite as much interaction as you can, you're going to produce something that might look nice on paper. You might be able to present it at a conference, but isn't actually going to help people's lives at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I would add there, agree with both of them, is it's easier said than done, right? Like if you're starting out in this space, you're not going to have you're not going to have access to do that. You have to ask permission to do those things. You need to be in an environment where that's the norm and you're not going out of your way to sort of say, well, have we asked people what they want? Because you're being given, like, go build the system that does this, and you have to go out of your way because it's not built into the process. Second is asking people what they want is, you ask them, well, what kind of model? And I've seen papers, actually, academic papers that sort of say, we asked people what kind of model they would use to predict on themselves. Like, are you kidding me? You want to ask somebody if they would use a tabular neural network versus a random forest for themselves. You're asking this person who's facing eviction whether we should be using this model. Well, that's participatory design, right? Like, yeah, it is technically, but it's a terrible. And so the question is, how do we, and again, where did these conversations happen is important. Who's involved in these conversations? Most people who are impacted by our work are not, don't speak the language that we speak, and we don't speak the language that they speak. So I think part of it is, how do we educate our students to be comfortable having these conversations, but not at the expense of the people that are being impacted, right? Because all of it, like, oh, go out, talk to community members about this in a class. Like, well, no, those people don't live there so that you can ask them. I hate the word lab, but like, oh, the city is our laboratory. Like, no. We might be the R&D lab for our city. The city is not our lab to run experiments on. And so I think we kind of need to figure out how do we give people. So for example, an example of this is one of the things, a project that we did with a local nonprofit was, we wanted to kind of figure out what some of this work is. What do people think? And we realized very quickly that us as researchers or students cannot go into the community and ask these questions. And so we worked with a local nonprofit where the community members were coming in anyway, and that nonprofit had a relationship with the community members to have a conversation with the community members, and record that conversation with their permission, and use those recordings as training materials for students. So students, don't go and talk to community members directly. First, listen to this, spend some time, invest some time, learn these things, and then go out. Or creating materials, like one of the things we've been working on is sort of, we're calling like a version of like People's Guide to X, which is, how do you explain to somebody so that they become informed contributors to your system, rather than put the burden on the person to come educated. Don't have those sessions at CMU or at Pitt, have them where those people are. So we've been doing sessions at, where some of the housing service centers. And a lot of it is like, it's not something we know how to do. We're learning this as we go, in partnerships with, community groups. And it gets awkward because accountability is like one of the things that I've been asking the housing team that we've been working with is, today, when somebody calls for help, like, hey, I'm being evicted, what you're telling them is, you're in line. When we get to you, like, you called first, we'll give you, we're out of money, sorry, call again next time. They don't think it's right, but they understand it. Tomorrow they call, like, well, we have money left, but we don't think you need it as much as the other person, so we're going to hold off on giving it to you. That's an awkward conversation. And maybe my person might say, that's not fair. I called first. They're not asking, why are you holding money for them? how do you have that conversation? Is not an ML or a CS or a data science question. It's a community question of how do we have a shared understanding about the system as well. It's designed to help people of this sort. We think you're less likely to become homeless, and you can have a conversation about, we think it's because of this, and you might say, well, you don't know me, you don't know my information, you have this thing wrong, and like, can we do that? I think those are the awkward things that we don't train our students, our faculty, our researchers in. And I think we kind of need to figure out those things before we get to, accountability and participation and involving stakeholders. Like, we know the words, we don't know the actions. But I'm optimistic.
So in just a little bit here, I'll invite questions from the audience. But before we do that, I'd like to get Randall or Pim's thoughts related to what Rayid mentioned. Which is what I think one thing that we're hearing here is that for people in this room who want to do something impactful in their community, right? There's a lot of knowledge, experience, skills that goes into being able to do that, right? And that's what some of you have said about starting at the local micro level. And I think Rayid's point is that students, faculty, coming out of our universities, a lot of the time don't even have it's hard to know where to start, right? It's hard to you don't even have the right skills to get started to build the skills in some sense. And so what should people do, right? If they want to do something that matters to get involved in their community, where should they start getting that kind of like the knowledge that they need?
I mean, I think a lot of people already have the knowledge. You care about your community. That's a good place to start. Now, if you wanted to get involved in activism at a bigger level, there's a lot of places to get plugged in, and I could help you do that if you're really interested in actually doing that. But I'd ask people to start at home, in your own street, your own apartment house. That's where you need to start at. I don't want you to turn into those organizations. It's good to be organized with your neighbors, but sometimes my experience, I've seen people, for instance, in East Liberty, where someone talking about putting some mixed use, but they wanted to put like close to 30% affordable housing, which is pretty good. And there were some neighbors, they called themselves Melon Orchard, which I grew up in East Liberty. I never heard of it, but they called themselves, and their main idea was, we don't want that. And if you do it, we don't want that much of it. And so sometimes I get hesitant about people in the cities because people organize, and a lot of times they get negative because, remember I talked about that house earlier? Yeah, we don't want anything that may take down the price of this house. So yeah, we want more affordable housing in Pittsburgh. We just don't want it here. And so, but I do think we need to be organized. But what I would ask people to do, again, if you were serious about and you'd like to get more deeply involved in the housing justice movement in Pittsburgh, please come and talk to me. But what I'd ask people to do is, again, start on your street and start in your apartment house. And before I was part of a mass displacement, I was one of those folks who, just like, remember everybody seen the FanDuel commercial? What does winning feel like? My neighbor coming down the hall doesn't see me, so I don't have to talk to them or hear about their dog again or whatever. I was that same kind of person. Please don't knock on my door for sugar, because I honestly don't want to. No, I don't want to have a conversation about your dog and whether you should get the dog spaded or not. But you know what? When that happened to me at Penn Plaza, I happened to run into some very nice people. No, maybe they didn't graduate from the University of Pittsburgh with a few degrees and stuff, but they were some very nice people that I could have gotten to know. We came to know each other in a crisis, and I swore never to do that. So someone just moved close to me. I seen him moving in things, and I went up. Hello, my name is Randall. Welcome to the neighborhood. Is there something that I can do to help you? So that's where you start at, is just getting to know your neighbors, because this whole thing, when I talk about housing, is really about rebuilding community. And that's how they really get us. It's because we're not unified. We're not a community. We're like individuals doing our own thing. And that's how they're able to get us. So that's what it started at. Again, if you want to get serious and get more involved, there's a lot of good work going on in Pittsburgh around housing. But if I would ask anybody, just do that first thing, be a neighbor to somebody. Be sure to say hi to your neighbors And I think that's where we can start to make the biggest difference in changing the conditions that exist right now in the city of Pittsburgh.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. I think getting involved in your communities is super important. I actually remember there were a lot of hearings around the Penn Plaza stuff that I went to, right, a number of years ago, and we weren't successful.
Yes, we were.
Say more.
Because we got hurt. And
Yeah.
we changed the way people think about housing in the city. So we did not lose that. We didn't save Penn Plaza, but we did not lose.
That's a great point. I mean, they impacted me and were some of the reason that I got into this work as well. So I think in addition to the getting involved in communities, activist lens, for the folks in the room that have a technical skill set, something that I just want to plug is I think working in government is very underrated. I think if you care about getting knowledge out about, like, look, these homelessness problems, severe mental illness, substance use disorder, jail reentry, these sort of problems are some of the most difficult problems that we have as a society. We're largely in many ways losing on these fronts all over the country. And each of the different communities has ways that it's trying to solve its problems, experiment, work with local stakeholders and push things forward. And I think technical skills are very important here. You can be the person that the outside academic can come into and talk to. You can orient them, you can get them data, and you can solve problems. I do think our team works with, at any given time, maybe 30 external academics and is helping to do the work of getting them the context and getting them the data so that they can actually be useful. So I think, there are many good places to work in federal government, in local government, in academia, et cetera. But I think a lot of people with this sort of skill set, the people in this sort of room, don't always consider government jobs. And I'll say that, like, for me personally, this has been a dream outcome. And it's a place that I believe can make an impact and push the needle or push the ball forward, whatever the metaphor is, to some meaningful extent. So that's something I just want to plug as well.
10 seconds of, I completely agree with Pim. If you want to make a real difference, be inside, not outside. It's very nice to be outside. The time scales are wonderful, semester long, summers, midterms. But if you actually want to get something done, and be inside, because there's no substitute for that. So go inside.
And also mention some of your work. We received a lot of good support from the universities, from CMU and things, as far as documenting our story and documenting the displacement story. There was a CMU lab who put together actually where you could actually see where, the red dots will represent the Black community in like 1991, and they could actually place, because you can track a lot of people through now Section 8 vouchers, and they could actually had a program that anybody could see, seeing the dots moving to the more lower income eastern suburbs of the city. They didn't move to the North Hills, they moved towards the southern one. And so that kind of work, actually documenting what is happening in Pittsburgh, is incredibly important for us to tell our story and to mobilize people.
Okay, and with that, I think we have about 15 minutes left. So I'd like to invite questions from the audience. Please, raise your hand and we'll run the mic over. So here, and then Nikhil.
Hi, thank you. Because we're at a machine learning conference, I'm wondering, do you see any opportunities or risks for the use of AI in housing, and what you think about that?
I mean, I think all of us, but I'm assuming agree here, both, like anything else, right? I think the way to sort of, for me, simply is, there are people doing really good work. Can these tools be used to support them, make it easier for them to do the right thing? They're not trying to do the wrong thing. They're trying to do the right thing. They don't have, so can we give them tools that help them do their job better, get to people earlier, find the right people, evaluate how well those outcomes are changing, monitor things so that they can warn people when something is going wrong. Along with all those things, I'm going to say something pretty shallow, right? For all these things come risk if you don't do it right. If you have the wrong values in there. if you are not rigorous about what you're doing, or if you want perfection as opposed to something that does, you can wait 5 years for perfection and wait and see thousands of people go homeless. So I don't think anything I'm saying is deep, but I think, there are, if we think that the current system is perfect, we're adding any technology and AI is going to make it just worse. And because humans have done such a wonderful job of allocating housing today, then don't change anything. Keep going. If we think we can improve it, then we have to kind of figure out how do we develop these things so that they result in improvement rather than making things worse. And I'd say one more thing is a lot of these tools off the shelf will just propagate what we're doing today, right? So we can't just use them off the shelf blindly. We have to design them so that they are doing what we want them to do and evaluate them in a way that we keep checking for that as opposed to hoping that they do it.
Yes, I'll take a quick swing and maybe I'll be lower level and more tactical or something. But I do actually think that across the range of human services that ML has particularly nice applications for the housing space. One of the reasons is we have some treatments which are essentially 90 to 95% effective, which is if you move somebody into a house, it really prevents them from being homeless. Like that, it's something I say a lot, but it's something I don't think we often fixate on. So if you do target according to baseline risk of homelessness, you increase your overall treatment effects, which is very technical language of just saying that like the prioritization problem here is actually pretty important. The second thing I think is interesting is trying to embed causal inference into what you're doing. So in program rollout in some way, embedding some way of getting robust understanding of if the thing that you're doing is working. Because across all of these problems in Allegheny County, we spend $1.4 billion on human services across the country. That's not just housing. I'm lumping everything together. I want to be careful there. But we're really trying as a society in many ways. There are things that we could do better. There's ways that we can improve these systems. And from the people that I know working on the inside, the real policy makers, folks want to know what works and what doesn't, because you could have some new great idea. We're going to do shallow rent subsidies where more people get $400 a month to support their housing, or we're going to do fewer. There's infinite programs you can come up with. But at the end of the day, if you don't think about that causal inference question as you roll stuff out, you're going to get 2 years down the road and you're not going to really know if the thing worked or not. And from what I know of people that are working, they're sort of very hungry and desperate for this sort of like these evaluations that are high quality. And so this is Rayid and some of his work has done a really good job at this. Other folks are doing it. Brian and I have a paper on trying to do things, but I think, thinking about as you're rolling out programs, really thinking about the evaluation so we can know if we're having that positive impact and being sort of humble with ourselves are all, I think, kind of really interesting technical questions, but really important from a practical point of view.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, so I think this is a question for any or all of you, but could y'all maybe like just walk us through maybe like a specific project or collaboration sort of between like a technical team and sort of someone in your organizations of sort of like how did it get started, and then maybe like, false paths throughout the way, like all the way to like either maybe you just decided it wasn't a good idea or sort of like something happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you want to talk failures, basically?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a million of them, right? Well, you can talk about the election prediction failures of other people. But so projects die at millions of stages, right? And dying is a good thing in many cases. You don't want to just keep doing it because you started on it. I think that there are times when, so for example, here, one of the projects that failed for nothing I could have done was working with Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, because this was when they were created pretty early on, 2013. We were looking at, again, issues with equity issues around mortgage and acceptance. And it turns out that, Snowden happened at that time, and they were told you cannot give data to anyone because Congress is asking to each person who has access to data to testify in front of them. Project. So most projects kind of die in the very beginning because of data access issues. There are projects that died. So I was working with Human Rights Campaign, who sort of came and said, we just did this massive survey and of LGBTQ youth, and they wanted us to kind of help them analyze the survey. And the question I asked was, well, what do you want to do with that? Like, I don't know, analyze the survey? Well, but like, okay, we analyze it. I give you something. What are you going to do with it? Like, I don't know. And so a lot of projects die or get killed because there's no downstream action that somebody could take, in which case it's not a good use of your time. We could all analyze data, but if nobody is there downstream to do something with it, it's not that it's not useful. It's just in your list of priorities, there are other people who have action things that they can take. So like we'll prioritize action projects more than curiosity projects because they're infinite curiosity projects, but limited. Other things, they don't die, but they get to a point where we find that it's not accurate enough to be actionable over status quo, right? So kind of to Pim's really good point of, if we weren't there, somebody wouldn't just go randomly targeting people, right? Which is, most papers compare against random, not against status quo. People do reasonable things in status quo, and we need to kind of compare to that. And when we compare them, it's like, look, it's just not accurate enough to be worth implementing this ML model that's going to take this much money to build, to maintain, to run every day. It's not, is it worth that? It has to be at least this much better and help this many more people. Otherwise, that money could be allocated to give assistance to those people than this overhead. So that's a, it was a vaccination targeting program in Mexico. That was another project around criminal justice where they needed to go get more data and build more data integration, data use agreements with other county agencies, because we didn't know enough about this person to be able to accurately identify their risk, and it wasn't. So these, I mean, there are many more, but I'll stop now. As a whole, I have a whole list of, projects which die at different stages.
Yeah, I don't know how much more, like I was trying to think of projects which ended, and usually they're for kind of dull reasons or something. We're supposed to forecast how the spending is going to change going forward, and just taking spending from last year is probably as good as you can do or something. And you thought one of the nice parts about working on the inside is that there is no shortage of problems. And so when you kind of get to that moment where you're like, oh, there's not much here, you just go and work on something else. I will say that I think the successful projects might have really interesting points, which are that like the product you think you're going to build when you start is super different than the product that you end up building. So we're starting a project right now, which is on mental health residential housing. This is residential housing for folks with severe mental illness and actually need quite a bit of supports in order to maintain that housing. And what we're building is sort of just like a wellness check system, which is, there's notes being written by the caseworkers. We're going to read those text notes in, process them. We also have a lot of administrative data on folks. So if folks are psychiatrically committed, we can surface that. And our first steps now are just sort of in one HTML, getting all of the data systems to talk to each other so we can extract it. There's a few folks on my team who are like trying to craft things right now. And I'm like, absolutely not. We have no idea what we're doing. Like the only thing that we can do right now is just prove we can extract the data. We're going to go talk to people, see what they actually need. And at that point, we're going to build something completely different than what we think we're going to build. And so I'm like wishing I was better on my feet, but I'm sure if I thought through any successful project, it will just turn and you're going to build something completely different than what you thought you were going to do at the outset. Yeah.
Okay, then I think we have time for, yeah, I think we're, in a queue. But I think this is likely our last question, but we'll see.
Yeah, thank you for your time today. We enjoyed hearing you speak. I want to ask a little bit of an adversarial question, perhaps, and take this out of ignorance from my intuition and perhaps background. But this conversation seemed to focus a lot on the micro lens and what individuals or people working with communities can do. And I am wondering about the macro market-based perspective. here, where two things I'm thinking of is if housing prices collapse by 30%, that has severe ramifications kind of across the board. And maintaining housing does have recurring costs, which means that either the people themselves who are living in homes need to support the housing, or it needs to be subsidized in some way, which does have other, again, systemic externalities. So I'm wondering where that lens comes into play in either the proposed solutions or enter your own personal perspectives onto this issue. Thank you.
So it almost sounds like we're maybe talking about those that we should support, and we don't want to encourage people to be too dependent in some kind of way. Maybe is that what you're asking? Because we do understand that people, once they're in a home, they do have to maintain that home. And so hopefully, like all of us here, we want to be self-sufficient and not be dependent on any type of government subsidy. And that is the ideal, for everyone to be able to go to work and pay their rent. So what we're talking about is not only talking about those who maybe can't do that and may need some support, we're also talking about people that can do that, but you have a system in place that is set up to extract as much income from an individual as a landlord is able to do, legally, to extract as much income from a working person as they possibly can. So that's what we're saying, that's where the systems go wrong. So again, I'm prepared to assist people who are not in a position to support themselves. I think we should be ready to do that. But in other instances where, again, people go to work every day, they work 50 or 60 hours a week, they should be able to live decently. And so that's why we have to create a system that is alternative to that landlord. Again, that's completely legal. That landlord's not doing anything wrong, is not doing anything unethical. That's what they're allowed to do. But we have an obligation, and people like me, to set up an alternative to that person, to give you an alternative to that. And that's where we talk about public housing. They call it social housing in Europe, where people of all incomes are able to access public housing. And then people like me, again, we would like to create, non-market solutions. One of those things are housing cooperatives, where we can collectively own some housing, and that way we determine, what our monthly costs are going to be, and we also get that security. So I think I understand your question. I'm just saying what we're just about, and I hope I understood your question. We're just talking about trying to create alternatives to the current system that we have in place, which is not very people or worker friendly.
Pim, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I would just maybe add one thing. I think the idea of housing prices dropping 30% or something that might be worrying if we were in that world or something, but I don't know if you're from Pittsburgh, but fair market rents here have gone up 30% in the last 5 years, and that's over inflation. That's in real terms. And housing prices have likewise changed. I mean, in many of mid-sized cities across the country, we've had sort of like doubling of housing costs. I actually bought a house in 2020 that had sold 3 years previously for literally half the price. And so these are sort of things that are happening to our communities that certain people are able to stay, certain people have to leave, and they're adjusting really quickly. So I think there's non-market solutions, co-ops. You could imagine public housing. You could imagine nonprofits running housing and charging at cost for what it actually takes to maintain. So we're taking in the money that it takes to maintain the houses. Those would be non-market solutions. Even within market solutions, you can encourage, for example, getting rid of the parking requirements, building a little bit more densely, taking a proactive approach. Minneapolis is famous for doing this, like within market solutions, a lot of things which would keep housing prices under control. So I think it's sort of a both and moment. We need to do all of these things. But the thing that we need to do is keep housing prices down, because people cannot pay 30%, 50% of their income for housing. What that means is that they're on the precipice of homelessness. And if they have a breakup, they have a bad fight with somebody, they lose a job, they're going to be in our homelessness system really quickly. And while the agency I work on thinks a lot about what to do when they're there, we should also be working on what to, as a society, we should be working on what to do so there's less people on the precipice of that cliff.
Any last thoughts? Okay, then I think we're at time. So please join me in thanking our panelists.